Thank you.
Speaking for myself, it's just been wonderful, and thank you all for being here. Before I once again turn this over to Sister B, John F. Our chairman of the convention, has asked me to please thank our voice of the convention, David, for such a marvelous job. Well done. Thank you, David. Lots of hard work and thought has been put through all of this, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. Now, as far as Sister B, I know we're in for a treat, and when I say we, I'm including myself because I have not heard her story as of yet. We have become acquainted through an answer phone machine, maybe 2 conversations within the past 5 months. When I met Sister B at the airport on Friday, I felt as though I have known her all of my life. She's a dear, loved person, and I'm going to turn this over to Sister B. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. My name is Bea, and I'm an alcoholic. Happy Easter to all of you. I think this is all of our feast day today because I think we were all dead and now we've risen. Hallelujah. Before I get into my favorite topic, which is myself, I want to thank the committee for inviting me. And I especially want to thank you, Veronica, for the way you took care of me prior to my meeting you. That means a great deal to somebody who reverts into orphanhood almost immediately. None of you have ever done that, but, you know, I get little very easily. So Veronica made sure that I was well taken care of. And I also want to say that, at least in this case, behind every great woman, there is a great man. And this is the great man behind this woman. And I want all of us to give him a hand. Leo. I feel like I have parents and sisters and brothers and family all over the world because I'm part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm very grateful for that gift today. What I usually say when I'm doing this kind of stuff, I usually say that my life was perfect until I was 2. And when I got to be 2, it all fell apart for me. Now, my plane goes at 1:31, so you've got a long journey from now until then to hear what happened from I was 2 until now, and I'm sure you're not even interested. But what I wanted to do was kind of touch on some of the causes and conditions that got me to this day. I loved what Frank said yesterday when he said, we're not victims of anything but victims of our perceptions. And I'm a victim of my perceptions of life. So when I was 2, my little sister was born, and she moved into my spot in the world, and my spot in the world happened to be the center. Now, if you're interested in knowing anything more about me, and I know you will, my story is on page 62 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous because it says that selfishness, self-centeredness is our problem. That's not a very complimentary thing to have to tell me on Easter Sunday morning, but I've owned that today, and I know that that's part of the ism of my disease. And I know that basically what I want to do is to have everything revolving around me. And so when I was 2, my sister was born, and she moved into my spot, and my spot was the center. And I've been trying to retrieve that spot ever since. And then my parents went on having babies. They had a boy, and then they had 2 more girls. And it seemed that every time they had a new child into the family, it seemed to me and felt to me that my place was being pushed out, and I was on the outside looking in, on the periphery. And when I was 8 years of age, my father went to work one day, and he never did come home. He was killed in an accident suddenly. A tree fell on top of him and killed him. And I grieved my father, and I didn't know that I was grieving my father. And I never did come in touch with any of that until I got sober. And what I remember about that event was that on the day my daddy was buried, on his funeral day, my mom called me aside from all of the rest of the little children. I was 8, and the youngest was less than a year old. And my mom was 32. And she called me aside and she said, "B, I want you to help me to raise these children." And I started doing the thing that I know very little about today, and it's called the business of growing up. Now, I know most of you probably have done this, but I haven't done this completely yet. But if I stay close to you, I may have a chance of doing that. And then my mom proceeded to teach me everything she knew. She taught me how to clean and cook and babysit, and she was a school teacher, and she taught me how to do all sorts of little school teachery things. In fact, my mom taught me what it says on page 61. On page 61 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, is she not a victim of the delusion that she can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only she manages well? And what my mom taught me to do was how to manage well. And I thought the business of growing up was to learn how to manage well. I'm very interested in that word, rest. W-R-E-S-T. And if you ever were to look it up in the dictionary, it's the definition in the dictionary I looked in says to push and pull in a violent fashion. Born to struggle. And I think I might have a couple of friends here in this room who were born to struggle. And so I thought that the idea was to get efficient and to go for it and to learn how to manage well. And so when I got into my teenage years, I did what most people do. I started thinking about what I would want to be doing with the rest of my life. And so what I decided to do was to become a saint. Now, at the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous that I attend, they always read that part from chapter 5 where it says, we are not saints. And when I first got into Alcoholics Anonymous, it used to hurt my feelings a lot, because I just didn't want to be a little saint. I wanted to be a big, spectacular, really important saint. And so in trying to become a saint, what I decided to do, I decided to become a Catholic nun. And I need to let you know now that I've been doing Catholic nunnyhood for 43 years, 8 months, and about 5 days. It's a long time, especially when you're doing celibacy. It's a long time. Sometimes people come to me. Good. Glad you appreciate that. Sometimes people come to me when I give retreats. That's what I do for my ministry. And they say to me, Sister B, I've been celibate for 8.5 months. And I say, come and talk to me, honey. I'll tell you. I'm so grateful to God for this life I have, for this vocation that I was given. And so I started into this nunny stuff. And I know there's at least 2 of you in this room, maybe 3, who have a resentment against somebody like me. I need to let you know now that I didn't do it to you. What I also like to say to you, that if any of you in this room, anybody here has ever been hurt by a nun or a priest or any leader of any church or any authority figure, on behalf of them all, I would like to make amends to you, because sometimes we in the church find it difficult to say that we're sorry. And I want to tell you that I'm sorry on behalf of the church for any of you who might have been hurt by people like me. I also want to let you know that what I discovered since I got into Alcoholics Anonymous is that there are assholes every place. There are some Catholic assholes and Lutheran assholes and Baptist assholes and Methodist assholes and Jewish assholes. And in Southern California, where I live, there are 1 or 2 in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've only been in Al-Anon a couple of years, so I don't think I found any in Al-Anon yet. So It's wonderful. It's wonderful that we get to laugh on this day because, you and I didn't know what it felt like to laugh right from the bottom of our insides. It's just a wonderful thing to do. I think laughing is a real sign of our continued healing and our continued recovery. Anyway, I started into this nunny stuff and they sent me over to England to finish my education, and I graduated from the University of London, and I had did well, and they assigned me to teach in England, and I was teaching there for a while, and I loved teaching children, and I loved everything about the whole field of education, about opening people's minds, and just seemed like it was going to be wonderful, except that an interesting thing happened in my head. And in my head, on a regular basis, a voice would just go off, almost explode, and the voice would say something like this: if only they would shape up, I would feel better. Now, I know you've never heard that voice exactly like that, but it seems to me that I've heard that voice lots. And when I'm not working my program today, that voice comes back loudly and clearly, and it tells me the same lie, that if only they would do it differently, I would feel better. I will automatically want to reach out for something or someone out there, way out there, to fix me. And when I came to you, you told me that happiness was an inside job, and I had to start way from the bottom of me. Anyway, I did think that if only they would all shape up, I'd feel better. And so one day, I came home from school, and on our bulletin board, when I arrived home, in the convent, there was a letter, and the letter said, would any of you sisters like to volunteer to go to California? Because we're starting a new place there. So I signed up, of course, because I'm always signing up for everything. And I signed up, and I knew that I was needed there because I wanted to be close to Hollywood. And I signed up, and they picked me, and I was real pleased. And when I was leaving, my boss lady, my superior, said to me, "Sister, we're going to put you in charge." Now, there is nothing that a potential budding alcoholic likes to hear better than they're going to be put in charge. Now, some of us don't admit that for a long time because we stay in charge nicely or not nicely. But most of us like to be in charge. The book talks about people like us wanting to run the show. We like to arrange the lights, the ballet, and fix everything to suit ourselves. And so I arrived in Southern California on the 16th of August, 1964. And everything was fine for a while. And the while was about 5 days. And then I was to meet the pastor. And immediately the voice went off in my head, and it said, if only he would shape up, I would feel better. And immediately we started to lock horns and to try to kill each other. Now, I know you've never done that, but we tried that. And I tried to really make him shape up so that I'd feel better. And he had the sense that he was in charge, and I knew that I was in charge, and it was just really awful. And we tried to fight nicely so that nobody would see us. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever tried to do that. It's really difficult. It takes a lot of energy. But a magical, wonderful thing happened for me. To cut a very long story short, this is like jumping over several years. One day, a knock came to my office door after school, and a lady who had some children in our school said to me, "Sister, would you like to come over and swim at our swimming pool?" And we all went over there, piled all the nunny bunnies into the station wagon. All nuns had station wagons in those days. And we piled them all in, and we all went over, changed into our swimsuits, and we swam. And after we were all done, she came to the deck of the pool, and she had a large tray and a pitcher and some glasses. And on the top of the glasses, there was salt. And I took a large draught of what she poured for me. And I will never forget the spiritual awakening that I experienced at that moment. It was a spectacular spiritual awakening. Now, I don't know, Veronica, how you drank when you were in Australia, but when I tell this story about these margaritas in Australia, they kind of look at me because they're not as common in Australia as they are here. And I wonder, my sponsor always tells me never to say this, but I always do anyway. I wonder how we qualify for this program where we haven't had a margarita. That's just the most wonderful thing on earth. I can remember just the feeling in my neck and in my shoulders and in my arms and my fingers, and the feeling of just at oneness with the entire universe. And I can remember saying to the lady before I left, could we please have the recipe? And so she gave me the recipe to take home. And I thought the nicest thing that I would get to do on a regular basis would be to whip up this recipe for these nunny bunnies who worked so hard, because they worked for me. They worked very hard for me. I was the kind of a school principal who would say on a Friday, some of you might be teachers in this room today, and I would say to them on a Friday, let's change all the classrooms. Let's move everything around. Let's put the first graders into the sixth grade. Let's put the fifth graders into the fourth grade. Let's just have general chaos. Don't you like chaos too? Don't you, please God, don't you still like chaos sometimes? You know, things are getting a little bit even and boring and serene. Don't you like to throw a little zinger in there to get excitement going? Oh, thanks be to God. I've got a few friends here. You know, it's hard for me sometimes to live with this business that we're all trying to get. It's called a quiet heart. This quiet heart sometimes gets boring for me. And so when it gets boring, I'll throw something in there to stir it up and to sabotage anything that could be nice. Like Liz said last night, we don't know how to do good. We don't know how to experience good stuff. We don't know how to experience success. So when everything would be going nice and calm, I'd say, let's churn this whole thing up and get it moving. And then we'd all get tired. And that would be wonderful to get tired, because if we got tired, then we could have our reward. And our reward was in that closet. And I could mix it up in the blender and we'd sit there. And I noticed from the word go that these gals, these nunny bunnies, did not drink like I did. They were the kind of people who would say, let's have the little glasses. Can you imagine? The little glasses. And then they would sit with their little glasses and they would hold their little finger out like so. And they would sip. Now, I have never been known to sip alcohol. I guzzled it into me, and when I was drinking that which I had in front of me, I was always thinking about when I was going to get the next one. I don't know if you relate to that, but I never could enjoy what was right in front of me. And so I found out almost immediately that we did not drink the same way. And my drinking career started. Now, one of my favorite places for drinking was Mexico, because I was kind of smart. I knew that if you drank and drove, that you would get caught. And if you're somebody like me, all dressed in the nunny clothes, you know, like a nunny habit, there are pictures of us on the bottle of Blue Nun wine. I never counted it because it was Blue Nun wine. You know, I thought that was kind of holy wine. Didn't taste very good either. I preferred the harder stuff. But anyway, I would say to them, you know, let's have this little get together, and we would sort of have a little evening together, and they would want to be kind of laid back, but I would want to be. But my favorite place for drinking was Mexico, and there was this man. He was in our parish, and he had a trailer down in Mexico, and he gave me the keys one day, and he said, "Sister, this is the key of the front door, and this is the key of the cabana." And then he held up a tiny little key, and he said, "This is the key of the liquor cabinet. Help yourself." And I said, "Praise God, from whom all blessings flow." And I said to the nunny bunnies, you know, pretty soon, more than 50% of Southern California will be Hispanic. So we need to get down to Mexico as often as we can so that we can learn how to speak Spanish. See, this disease that I have tells me lots and lots of lies. It's a disease that deludes me. It's delusional. It tells me all sorts of plays tricks with my mind, you know. And so we would get down to Mexico as often as we could. We'd pile into the station wagon. We would drive down there. It took us 2 hours to get down there. And we'd drive down, and we would try to learn Spanish with the Americans and the Canadians who lived in that little trailer park. You know what I mean? But most of all, we went down to drink. Most of all, I went down to drink. And I would come home, you know, feeling no pain and thinking, when could we get back there again? And pretty soon, and I don't know how long pretty soon was, it could have been a couple of years, but pretty soon I started to feel that all wasn't well, because there was this thing going on in my mind. The big book calls it, in the doctor's opinion, it calls it the phenomenon of craving. And what I knew was that I wanted to drink more than anything else in the world. And I was thinking of alcohol constantly. I was thinking especially at 2:12 in the morning. I don't know if you ever watched the digital clock at 2:12, and all I thought of was wanting to drink. And I knew there was something strange about anybody who wants to drink at 2:12 in the morning. I did not want to be an alcoholic. That was definitely not in my agenda. Remember, my agenda was I was going to become a saint. And being an alcoholic and a saint didn't seem to be in the same category for some reason. In those days, I believed that. I don't believe that today at all. But I believed that then. And so I started to die. And I started thinking about what I was going to do. Now, I don't know if you ever took care of your drinking problem by giving up alcohol for a little while, by stopping all by yourselves. And what I did was I stopped all by myself for a while. And then what happened for me was I started to shake and sweat and cry. And I was in such a terrible state, I went to the doctor. And the doctor said, well, what's the problem? And I said, well, I think I'm having a nervous breakdown. And he said, oh, yeah, with a schedule like you have, you definitely sound like you probably are. And then he gave me levothyroxine, and later he graduated me into Librium and Valium. And I had these 4 prescription drugs. And I always felt like the music on Twilight Zone. That's how they made me feel. The lights are on, but there's nobody home. That's the kind of way I felt. You know, like, na, 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 you know, just way off there, you know. Alcohol was definitely the drug of my choice. And what happened for me was that I started to die. And then I said, I know what I'll do. I'll pray more. I'll pray more and I'll ask God so that I won't have to want to drink so much. Now, it never occurred to me that I would want to be giving up drinking. I didn't want to give up drinking because, gosh, I'd given up everything else. So I thought, geez, you know, can't give up drinking too. So I decided to make a 30-day retreat up in Northern California in a place called Novato. And I made it up there with a lot of other nunny bunnies who were making a 30-day retreat. And we prayed and we fasted and we fasted and we prayed and we prayed and we fasted. And about the 15th day of the 30 days, the priest who was directing the retreat, he said, now you're going to have a break day so you can take off and go wherever you want. And the other gal said to me, is there any place special you would like to go? And I said, I would like to visit the Napa Valley, please. I thought that was kind of cultural, you know what I mean? As long as I was up there, I might as well take in all the culture in the Napa Valley, which in my case was visiting all the wineries. And so we visited those wineries where they gave us those tiny, godforsaken little glasses to taste wine. Some of you have done that, and it's terrible. But I can remember the day after that, I had the most awful hangover. But I knew that on the 30th day, when I was all done this praying, see, I believed in a God at that time with whom I bargained, that if I did this for God, then God would do that for me. And if I was a good girl and I did all this stuff, God was going to kind of reward me. I didn't find the God, the unconditional God that I have this moment, this day. I didn't find this God until I was into Alcoholics Anonymous for a while. I found this God through people like you, and it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. The greatest gift. And so I came back on the 30th day after doing all this praying, and I wanted to drink more than anything else in the whole world. And I can remember going into our little chapel in the convent. We have a darling little chapel there in the convent. And I can remember I was so angry with God. Now, some of you may be offended when I tell you this, but I have to tell you the truth. I was so angry with God that I knelt before the tabernacle and I gave God the finger. The 8th graders had taught me how to do that, so I knew how to do that. And so I was very upset, and I started into my dying. Now, you know, each of us we do this differently. We die differently, but we all die. We all die. And if I were to start with Veronica here and go all around this room, all around, and end up here with you, David, and I'd say to each of you, how did you die? Do you remember where you were? Do you remember, was there anybody with you? Were you all by yourself? Were you in a hospital? Were you in a jail? Were you by the side of the road in an automobile accident? Were you trying to function highly like I was in whatever job that you were in? Where were you when you died? I love the way that Bill Wilson writes about this in his story in the big book. On page 8, he says that no words can tell of the loneliness. And no matter how many people we had around us or where we were, that's the one common denominator that puts us all together in this room today. And it doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter where we were born. It doesn't matter how much education we have, how much money we have, what our ethnic background is. Nothing matters except that we have this commonality here in this room today, and that is that each of us died. And that no words can tell of the loneliness and the bitter morass of self-pity that overwhelmed us, like Bill W. says. And that we felt that alcohol was surrounding us like quicksands, and that we had met our match, whether we be alcoholic, whether we be directly involved with the disease of alcoholism like I am, or whether we're a family member. But everywhere we put our foot, we felt we were sinking, because alcohol had overcome us. It had gotten us by the back of the neck, and we were no longer able to do this thing. Lack of power then had become our dilemma. And I was standing in my convent at my moment of clarity when I was entrenched in this loneliness and this bitter morass of self-pity. Now remember, I was in charge. So how could I tell any of the nunny bunnies, guess what? Your boss lady's a drunk. How can you do that? How could I tell the pastor whom I loathed? I didn't dislike him, I loathed him. And how could I tell him, this lady who's running everything here for you, she has a drinking problem. How could I do that? I had nobody that I knew of. And so I was standing in our living room, it's called our community room, and I picked up this little pamphlet. And in the back of the pamphlet, there was an ad. And the ad said, "Sister, are you concerned about your drinking? If so, please call this number, collect." Now, out of the 140,000 sisters approximately that there were in the United States at that time, I, in my grandiosity, thought I was the only alcoholic nun in the whole United States, so I thought there must be one more somewhere. So I picked up the phone and I made a phone call to Massachusetts. Now, remember, I live in California. It was 9 o'clock at night, so it was midnight their time. And I talked to this lady and I told her a lot of lies. I told her I was having problems with a lot of people who were drinking, and I didn't know what to do about them. I told her I was changing a job, which was true. I was moving from being a school principal into a big administrative job in the diocese. And I was telling her all this and how wonderful I was and how important I was and how many degrees I had and how all the stuff and all about these people I was trying to help and how could I get help for them. And she listened to me and she was wonderful. Oh, she was just absolutely wonderful. So kind and just listened and listened. And she told me about places I could send all these people to and literature I could get these people to read. And then she said to me, "Sister, would you like to tell me a little bit about your own drinking pattern?" Oh, I don't know how. I just am amazed at the people in Massachusetts, how they know stuff like that, And then she said to me one of the most classic sentences I've ever heard, because it's what helps us in this whole business of healing. She said, "Because I can hear pain in your voice." And because she could hear the pain in my voice, she could reach out to me. And because you and I can hear the pain in one another's voices today, and we can see the pain in one another's eyes, because we can do that, you and I can be instruments of healing one another. Isn't that a miraculous gift that we have in this program? And she said to me, "With all the loving concern I have for a human being, I'm asking you to do something about your drinking." And I broke down and I cried into that telephone to this strange voice. And I sobbed bitterly. And she told me that it would be a good idea for me to go to some meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and to listen for the feelings. And so the next morning, I took myself to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was on the 2nd of December, 1978. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, on the 2nd of December 1978. And I went down to a place called Whittier. Now, at the time, we were wearing a kind of a modified nunny habit, so I took off all my nunny clothes and I put on regular clothes and I put on a whole bunch of eye makeup. I thought I would impress them at that meeting. And I arrived in this little meeting. It was a club, an Alano club, and it was called Serenity Hall. It was about the size of this area that we have up here, and was filled with smoke and little old men, it looked like, my perception, remember, who were all shuffling around Serenity Hall, shuffling like this. And there were two women. One left and one stayed. And the one who stayed was, as we say in Ireland, she was not the full shilling. Or she was one taco short of a combination plate. She would clap at the wrong time, she would laugh at the wrong time, and she would say, whoopee, and oh, and I thought, this is really not a good place for me to be. And then this man stood up at the podium. There was a podium kind of like this, and right in front of the podium there was a big thing that had the Serenity Prayer, And this man was sharing his experience, strength, and hope, and he was telling us that he had been to jail, and he now had his family back, and all about himself. And what was fascinating to me about this man was that he was using words that I used to punish the 8th graders for writing on the bathroom walls. He was using a word that starts with sh, which I'm sure you don't know here. And then he graduated into another one that starts with th. He was using the f word in sentences and like in various parts of speech, like a noun, a verb, an adjective, an adverb, a preposition, a conjunction. Right. He was using the f word with ing on the end and ed on the end, and on one occasion he used the f word with the word mother before it. And I can remember thinking, and this is going to be my spiritual leader for the rest of my life. And at the very end of that meeting, we all stood and we said the Lord's Prayer like we do. And then they said, keep coming back. And I remember getting into my car to go home, and I was crying really hard because I didn't want to be there and I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And I was petrified. And I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I was crying really hard. And this stuff that I put in my eyes was rolling down my face. And I said the sh word and the f word all the way home to the convent. Now, I'm not advocating that or anything, but I just need to tell you what happened for me, because I know that the minute some of you walked in these doors, whether it's A or Al-Anon or whatever program you're in, I know that you thought you were home. I know that because I sponsor people that happens to. And I need for you to know that I was not one of those willing alcoholics. I have another disease. I think it's kind of part of being Irish. It's called arrogance. And that means that I know a little bit about how to do everything. And so therefore, I will probably not be doing what you tell me to do. Anywhere, at any time. When I drive down the street and it says right hand lane must turn right, my immediate response to that always is, who said? And I always think of a way I can get around doing what the rest of the world has to do. I do. I tell you, that's the truth about me. I want to be different. I want to be separate and different. And so they were telling me basically 5 things. They were saying, don't drink or use any mind-altering drugs. Go to meetings. Now, I didn't think there was anything at meetings that would enhance what I already had. All these pieces of paper in my bottom drawer to say that I had degrees on God, so why would I be wanting to go to meetings and be around people like you? And then they said, read the book. Now, I picked up the book, and one of my majors was English, the English language, and I read the book, and I didn't feel that there was anything in the book, the way I read it, that could enhance me either. And so what I did was I took the book down to the beach, and I corrected it one day, and I fixed the sentences. I put semicolons and paragraphs and commas and fixed it so that the people in Serenity Hall would know how to read coherent English. And I told them that too. And they said, keep coming back, B. It's real embarrassing. And then they said I had to get a sponsor. Now, you know, we talk about sponsorship rather glibly in the program, I think. And it's really hard to get a sponsor when you don't trust anybody. You don't trust women or men or cats or dogs or snakes or mice or birds or anything. I mean, mostly you don't trust yourself and you don't like yourself. And so I was not about to get a sponsor. So what I did was just to keep these other women quiet, I would interview ladies. You know, I would interview them. And then I would hire them on temporarily. And when I didn't like what they were telling me, which was to get to lots of meetings and start doing some writing and all the stuff, I would fire them. And then I would be without a sponsor, so I go through the whole rigmarole again. I was miserable. I always passed this on because I was miserable not drinking. The only thing I didn't do was I didn't drink. And the reason I didn't drink was because I was afraid that people like all of you would find out, because they were extremely curious. Part of the United States, they would say things to me like, B, where do you live? And I'd say, this is an anonymous program. You know, it's one of those kind that you don't like very much when they come in first. And I was always whining and crying and upset. And I was on edge all the time. And a miracle happened for me, a real miracle that I want to pass on. I want to pass this on because what happens to some of us as we go through this road to happy destiny is that we sometimes get stuck in sobriety. We get stuck in recovery. And this program is supposed to help us to be happy, joyous, and free. And this is how I found out about that. I was in Serenity Hall one day, and this older member of the program, this older man who has since passed on to God, and he said to me, B, you're always unhappy and you're always miserable. And this program is supposed to help us to be happy, joyous, and free. And I said, well, I don't get that part. I missed that part. And I told him, you know, how I didn't like it and I didn't want to do it and I didn't agree with this, and psychologically it didn't go with this, and theologically it didn't go with that, and spiritually it didn't go with this. And I thought, poor man, I talked his ear off for about 25, 30 minutes. And he kept nodding his head and he was really patient. And he said, but you know what? This might work for you. He said, go home, kneel down, and ask God to give you the willingness to change your attitude. Now, I went home and I knelt down and I asked God to give me the willingness to change my attitude. And I would love to tell you that there were rainbows and there was a burning bush and I saw angels and it was very spectacular. But nothing like that really happened. Except that about 3 or 4 days after that, I was driving on the freeway. I was petrified to drive on the freeway. And I noticed the sunset in the rearview mirror. And it occurred to me that I'd been in California all these years and I hadn't even noticed a sunset. I was so busy thinking about other things. And it occurred to me also that I hadn't thought of having a drink for several days. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the merciless obsession to drink alcohol had been lifted and removed from me. And I started getting willing to do this program as it was designed. As it was designed for the recovering alcoholic, which is by way of the 12 steps. And that's what I found out. And what I found out also is that any time that I get stuck in my continued recovery, you know, when you're just on the verge of another surrender, you ever been there? Where you know that there's just one more thing that you have to do. You know, more is revealed and we need to do one more thing. And we're just right there. We stand at the turning point one more time. We're on the verge of another surrender. And when I'm on the verge of another surrender, and when I can remember to do this same recipe that I used then, everything changes. But what I know about God is this. God only gives me enough willingness for Easter Sunday, just today. God doesn't do tomorrow until tomorrow. And I have a habit of projecting into the future. You know, my life is into 1996. I plan my life into 1996. And so I'm often in 95 and 96. And what you people have taught me is I have to stay here. What I also found out is that God always gives me the willingness when I ask. In fact, the way I imagine God when I ask for the willingness, I imagine my God smiling at me and saying, "B, I thought you'd never ask. I'd be delighted. I'm just happy you asked me for this. Here's enough just for today." That's the kind of a God I have now. And then I got to understand what this deal really means. And I discovered page 62, which is interesting to me because it says the word selfishness and self-centered 13 times on page 62. Do you ever notice that? As you people here say here, it's a sign. Do I say that good? The people from Homa who are these rows down here, they teach me I know them real well. They teach me how to speak like you, and I love speaking like you. When I go back to California, I speak like you all here. And I say it's a sign. I think I do that very good. It's a sign, though, that selfishness and self-centeredness must be part of my problem. At the bottom there of page 62, it says, B, listen, this is the how and why of it. You have to quit playing God because it doesn't work. And hereafter, from now on, in this drama of life, God is going to be your director. He's the principal. You're his agent. He's the father and you're his child. And you know what, B? Most good ideas are simple. In fact, they're so simple that you would probably miss it because you're so complicated. But this concept that God's now in charge is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which you will pass to freedom. To the kind of freedom that this conference is talking about. The freedom from bondage, the bondage of ourselves, the bondage of the way we were, the bondage of having to have everything our own way. We're free from that bondage to the extent that we can let God be in charge. And what has been fascinating to me, and which I've shared with some of you here when I do my retreats, which I do all over the world now, the promises, the promises begin, I think, in the steps at the bottom of page 62. They say, this is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which you will pass to freedom. And the next promise of step 3 is on the top of page 63. It says, B, when you sincerely take this position, when you do this with all your heart, when you sincerely take that position, all sorts of remarkable things will follow for you. Now, remarkable is relative to our experience. A remarkable thing for me is when I'm standing here in front of you and I don't have one nerve in my body. I'm just standing here as God made me as I am, and I don't have one nerve in my body. I'm totally and completely free. I'm totally and completely relaxed. That's really remarkable. And then it goes on to promise and promise and promise. In step 3 there, all the things that are going to happen for us. We become less and less interested in our own little plans and designs, and we become more and more interested in what we can contribute to life, and we lose our fear, and we become more God conscious, and we ourselves will discover that we can face life successfully. And above all, we'll discover that we will be reborn. We'll be reborn. That's what it promises us. It's interesting to me. It's really interesting that it mentions the word self-centeredness or whatever 13 times, and then there are 13 promises. Isn't that a sign? Oh, I think it's a sign. Amazing. And there are 6 promises in step 4 and so on. One of my favorite ones in step 4 is the promise it has for fear. It says, to the extent that we trust infinite God rather than our finite selves, that this God will enable us to match calamity with serenity. Can you imagine if we were to put all the calamity that we had in our lives when we were drinking and since, if we were able to put all the calamity in the middle of this floor, in this ballroom, it would burst through the ceiling, all our calamities. And God is going to help us to match it, to equal it with serenity. So the more calamity we have had, the better off we are, the more serenity we have. Isn't that grand? Do you ever think about that? Oh, it's marvelous, this thing. And then it gives us the big recipe. The big recipe on page 68 there talks about the recipe for fear. It says we ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us see. Now, what you'd have us do, because I'm a doer, I'll do, but God What kind of a woman do you want me to be? What kind of a man, God, do you want me to be? That's what the fear prayer is about. God, remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. And the greatest promise I love this one on page 68. It says, at one. You know, the rest of the big book is kind of slow. It says we have to continue for a lifetime. It's not an overnight matter. Everything has to be patient. But on page 68, it says, at once. Now, I like that. At once we commence to outgrow fear. We start outgrowing fear to the extent that we let God take over. Isn't that wonderful? This program is the greatest gift that I've ever been given. I've experienced all of the promises on page 75, the promises of step 5. Being able to look the world in the eye, can you imagine? Isn't that wonderful? We don't have to tell lies anymore. We don't have to put on these masks. We don't have to pretend. Isn't that great? People like us who are always hiding, always contriving, always figuring it out, always trying to be a step ahead. Even, we don't have to do that anymore. We can stand tall and free from this kind of bondage. What a gift this is. And then the promises that we normally talk about, the promises on page 83 and 84 with this new freedom and new happiness. This new freedom and new happiness that I'm feeling today that I didn't even have yesterday. We get this newness every single day and that we don't regret. I don't regret anything that has happened to me because everything that has happened to me has been useful. It's been useful to me and it's been useful to other people. And I have comprehended the word serenity and I have known peace. And lots of the fears that I used to have gone away from me. Lots and lots of those fears gone away. And today, I intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle me. And above all, the last one there on page 84 is we suddenly realize that God's doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And I go through my world today, and it's a big world, the world I have today, and I do all kinds of suddenlies because through the program that people like you have taught me, I have learned to become conscious. I've learned to become aware, and I've learned to listen. And I've learned to do the suddenlies as I go through life. And I know now today that there are no mistakes. But I know that there are lots of signs. I know that. And these are the little things that God sends me, the little gifts like the Veronicas and There should be a Veronica everywhere in the United States and Canada and Australia. There should be Veronicas everywhere to nurture somebody like me. Because somebody like me, basically rebirthed into this little child again, this little orphan child who has nobody to take care of and who looks like Holly Hobby with red hair and freckles and who's always by herself and saying the cutest things, I will revert into that very easily. I can do orphanhood very, very fast. I get very little easily and I have to connect. I have to do a lot of connecting. I had a long talk with my sponsor the other day and she said, B, you need to do a lot of connecting, especially as you travel. I'm sure you experience this, Liz. You travel, you're at airports, you're surrounded with people, and you're all by yourself, And it's very easy to become orphaned again and to be disconnected. And what it tells us in the big book is that we're basically restless, irritable, and discontented people. And I love on page 35 where it reminds me, it says on Jim's story there on page 35, it said he's the man who went to have the sandwich and the milk. He put the whiskey into the milk. Wasn't that was kind of innovative, wasn't it? And it says in that story, all went well for a while, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Everything was fine. He was dry. He had gotten his job back. He was doing everything fine, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And when my spiritual life is not bright and shiny, what I basically do is I will isolate and I will scrunch up into this little corner and I will get into the fetal position and I'll be all by myself and I'll be all alone. So that's why I need Veronicas in my life and people who'll nurture me. And I have to reach out and receive the love that people like you have to give to me. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm grateful that I can stand here and receive that and know that that's for me and that's what I've needed my whole life. That's what I've needed my whole life. The promises in step 10 have been fascinating to me, especially the first one. It's on page, I think it's on page 85 or 84 somewhere. It says, we cease fighting. Can you imagine a woman from the north of Ireland ceasing fighting? Says we cease fighting everything and everybody, even alcohol. And sanity will have returned to us. Our sanity, our sound reasoning will have returned to us. And then a marvelous promise that says we've been We've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We'd be, there in the middle. I never knew the difference between being a doormat over here and a bulldozer over here. I could never get in that center spot where I could stand tall, appropriately assertive, and telling the truth. That's what I think that promise is. We'll be able to look the world in the eye and be appropriately assertive, placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. And we develop this vital sixth sense. As I mentioned earlier, I found God in this program, and I just want to share that with you real briefly. When I came as far as steps 6 and 7, I tried to think about my defects of character and became willing to have them removed. Now, it's hard to find defects if you're already a saint, so it was difficult. So I got to step 7, and I did exactly what it says on page 76 of the big book. It says, we're now ready to take step 7. And I said the prayer. The prayer on page 76, it said, my Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. And at that moment in my life, the God that I have today, this wonderful, broad-minded, all-embracing God, appeared to me. Not in flesh, but in my whole psychic self, I felt this God. And this God said to me, Bea, are you sure? Are you sure that it's okay to come to me, whether you're good or bad, right or wrong, true or false, perfect or imperfect? Now see, I had spent a lot of years in my life trying to be good for God. And it seems to me that those of us who have been raised in any kind of a religious denomination, we got that message somewhere. We perceived that we had to get good for God. We were never worthy. And what I found out when I got to step 7 was that God loved me anyway, that I didn't have to prove anything, I didn't have to pretend anything, and that my God loved me just as I was. And then I became what God always wanted me to become, was God's own child, God's kid. And then I knew the meaning of what I taught people for years. Now, I taught people stuff like this, but I didn't believe it pertained to me. I taught people things like, your God loves you so much that he would carve your name on the palm of his hand. Or your God loves you so much that he would dance over you and rejoice over you. Or your God loves you so much that he would notice you. He would notice you even if you were agitated, and he would store up your tears and he would put them into a little bottle. And he would just love you so tenderly and so separately and so differently. And I knew that would all be for you and that God would call you by your name. But I knew that I was just this little orphan girl somewhere in a corner and that God forgot about me too. And when I took step 7, I knew the difference between having knowledge in my head about God, all this information, and the experience of God in my heart. And I learned that through this program. Even though I had all these years of study, all these years of reading, all these years of theology, all these years of retreats. And I experienced God because I took step 7 on page 76. And if you haven't had the experience of God yet, and I hope to God you will get this experience of God, whatever your God means, it doesn't have to be the kind of God I have, but it's a wonderful experience, and it's an experience that we can't afford to be without that. We have to have this experience of God. And so I continued to learn about the steps when I came to step 11. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that I used to teach people how to pray and meditate before I got to this program. I still do that, but I do it differently because I've learned from people like you that I have to keep it all very, very simple. And what it tells me on page 86 is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, when you wake up, this is what you have to do. On awakening, what you have to do is think about the 24 hours ahead. And you have to consider your plans for the day. Consider them. In other words, there's a difference between your plans and your plots. My plots are what my thinking process tells me. And I do thinking real well. Frank mentioned this yesterday. I think well. I crave a think. I have a definite time every day. You know, like the 20 questions for drinking. Do you crave a drink? I crave a think at all kinds of times, and I think by myself. My thinking gets me into trouble. You know, sometimes I lose my way because of thinking. You know, one of my friends said my head would destroy me if it didn't need me for transportation. And that's why on page 86 it says, we ask God to direct our thinking. We ask God to come into our thought process and get all our thinking all aligned and out of the perceptions we have, because our perceptions can be askew. And then we start being on a different plane. You know, we start developing that intuition that we already had, but we didn't know how to develop it. And then what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of our mind. It's a wonderful, wonderful gift that we've been given through this program. It's fantastic. I find for me, the most important word that I have to learn to do today is the word pause. Pause. My sponsor said, because you're Irish, you don't understand the word pause. So you need to write the word stop on front of that in the big book, on top of it, so that you know to stop. And I'm delighted to share, some of you will have heard me talk about this before, that in the last few months, I opened up a house of pause. It's called an 11-step house, a house where people could come to pause and just to regroup. Is for people who get overwhelmed in recovery, in sobriety, and who need to breathe in and out. And so if you come to the International Convention next year, I hope you look us up, because we're there. We've got a place for people just to come and pause. It's called St. Clair's Garden, and it's a beautiful spot just for stopping and remembering the 11th step. Now, I don't know how step 12 works. I just know that it works through people like all of you, like y'all, who put this together and who, you know, continue to serve on committees in all kinds of different places through these programs. I know that God works. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at how God just can skip around and rip around these rooms all over the world. Fascinating to me. I get to be everywhere now. I just got back from Australia in January, where I gave a retreat on the 12 steps. It was just fabulous to see people all over trying to latch onto this spiritual program of recovery. It's really exciting. But you know, I'm always amazed how God does this. I think my God is real big, very Irish, got a great sense of humor, and laughs at me trying to figure this whole thing out. And God it doesn't get too picky and choosy about the messengers that he sends, you know. Sometimes he sends us messengers that we'd rather not listen to. I can remember I was sponsoring this one gal, and I was sponsored her real hard. It was the first couple of years of my sobriety, and I was very intent on doing this thing right. You know, I talked to her all the time, telling her she couldn't drink. But she said to me one day, you know, I'm going to do the steps and I want to go to meetings. And she did all the stuff. She read the book. She's a very smart woman. But she said, I'm going to take a glass of wine every single day because I know that I can do that. And I kept telling her, you know, you can't drink. You really can't drink. And she came to a morning meeting with me one morning, and this fellow stood up and, boring, you know, boring. You know, those kind, you don't have them here, but they're in California. Boring. And he stood up and he ended up as if it popped the same way as he always did. He said, this program works best if you don't drink or use mind-altering drugs between meetings. And when we left to go home, we sat in the car and she took me by the two hands and she said, B, we're not supposed to drink between meetings. I spent 6 months telling her that. She didn't get it. She never heard it. But she heard it through this asshole, you know. What do you know? So, you know, when I'm busy at meetings taking inventory, like you're talking, when I'm busy doing this, you know, taking inventory and saying, this has nothing to do, head going, you know, God is rippling somewhere in the room. And the asshole is saying exactly what somebody is going to hear. Isn't that amazing? That's real mysterious, and I don't get that. I don't understand how that works at all. And it reminds me of the word mystery that's through this program, the whole mystery. When I hear the word mystery, it reminds me of a couple of lines from Shakespeare, from the play King Lear, for he's going to be thrown into prison with his daughter Cordelia. Wonderful scene. And he says something like this to her. He said, and we shall laugh and pray and sing and tell old tales, who's in and who's out, and laugh at gilded butterflies, and take upon us the mystery of things, as though we were God's spies. In Alcoholics Anonymous and in Al-Anon, we get to take upon ourselves the mystery of things, as though we were God's spies. And we get to watch God showing off. God demonstrates, God shows off, and God shows off through these programs, and God shows off in these rooms through people that you and I would never have picked. And that's the mystery. And I'm so grateful that I don't know. I don't know today. All I know is that God is, and that I'm not God, and that God's in charge. That I know. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I'm going to be returning to the blessed land in October. And I'm so grateful that I met you people in my lives. And that you always, in Louisiana, wherever I go in Louisiana, I receive that wonderful, wonderful Southern hospitality. May God bless you. Thank you for inviting me. And I love all of you.